welcome back to the panel on technology and how it relates to scaling. The hardest problems, the most important topics are always at the end of the day, is my experience. My name is Philipp Schmidt. I'm at the MIT Media Lab, and I'm moderating a really fantastic panel with lots of different perspectives. My three panelists are Sashwati Banerjee, who is the founder and managing director of the Sesame Workshop in India, Michael Staten, who's a partner at Learn Capital, and Carol Williams, who's the country manager for World Reader Ghana. And we'll come to introductions in a second. We're going to do this in a slightly different format.
I think you need to raise your voice. Can you hear?
Can you hear me? No. Very well. You can hear me. All right. Is this better? Yes.
Better?
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. I was wondering at all the confused faces in the back. When I think about scale and quality, so the two things we care about, I can't really imagine a conversation that doesn't involve technology, because the sheer scope of the challenges we're looking at will require new formats and new models. The report mentions 250 million children are not completing 4 years of school, or even if they are completing 4 years of school, they're not learning the basics. 250 million kids. Another topic not in the report that I've been thinking about a lot is refugees. There are 4 million Syrian refugees, but there are really 60 million displaced people on the planet today, and that number is expected to increase to 600 million. So it's clear that to address the challenges in education that we're talking about, we will need fundamentally new ways of scaling, and digital technology can play a really important role in that. Now, I'm the Director of Learning Innovation at the MIT Media Lab. So on the whole, I'd say I'm pretty excited about technology and digital technologies, and I think there's a lot of opportunity. But technology alone is not going to be the solution. I think the solution can't not include technology, but certainly just looking at technology and ignoring the factors around it is not going to get us to the place where we want to go. And so today I want to take the opportunity with this great panel, but really with all of you, to explore the complexities of balancing glasses of water under conference chairs. The complexities of how we can make sure that digital technology can be a fundamental part of efforts to get not just millions learning, but maybe tens of millions or hundreds of millions learning. So I'll just say kind of a few things that build on the report, but also push us maybe in slightly new directions, because in a way, digital is the newest topic, and so understandably, the report focuses on things that we know a lot more about, and there are a lot of open questions around technology, and I think it's interesting to explore some of those future directions together. So the first one is, when we think about technology, we often talk about both the shiny, new, innovative solutions, or we look at ways that technology can help us scale things that we found works in some context. What we don't often do is talk about the questions that technology raises in rethinking what are the skills and competencies that children should be learning today. So what do we mean by quality education today and in the future? And in a way, if you look at the education system, it's still largely designed to prepare us for the world where we end up on top of a mountain by ourselves with a number 2 pencil in our hand. And we have to be ready to solve all the problems with all this information in our heads. And that's clearly not the world we live in anymore. And so thinking about digital literacy and the skills that kids need to develop, I think is one area of further work. And in a way, Seymour Papert, who was a founding faculty member at the Media Lab, gives us a really good way of thinking and talking about a world in which technology and learning and children intersect. And he was a psychologist and a mathematician. Actually, he was not a typical engineer, but he ended up at MIT and ended up being one of the group of people who founded the Media Lab because he had a revolutionary idea that computers could be tools that kids program rather than machines that program kids. And when he said this 30 years ago, I think it was kind of mind-blowing for many people. What I'm a little discouraged by is that it's still as mind-blowing today as it was then. We're still thinking a lot about computers as ways to program kids rather than kids programming computers to do things they want to do. So I think that's an interesting area, kind of why is there such a lack of imagination in technology innovation? And it's not just that it's computers programming kids, but for a large number of kids, it's computers that were programmed by people who are very far away programming their kids. And so questions around where is the origin of technology innovation? Where should innovation come from? And I have a bias, but we can explore this together. And I think it should come from the place where technology is used. So the closer you are to the issues, the better you understand them, the more innovative and relevant I think your solutions will be. So moving innovation more to the edges rather than concentrating it in among other places like MIT and a few other universities in the US. So better mechanisms for doing this, I think, would be an interesting topic. And finally, and I'll just tee this off, and I don't expect us to go into this topic very much, but we're really just at the cusp of what is about to happen to the way we learn. And it's a little bit scary and unimaginable. When we open the newspapers, we read about computers being better at playing chess. We're like, okay, Jeopardy, well, we don't really care. Go. Now we're starting to get a little nervous. They're going to be better drivers than we are very, very soon. And in some cases, they're already better at diagnosing certain medical conditions than doctors are. And I was talking to Zbigniew yesterday. I don't know if he's still here, but he is there, yeah, about when will computers develop something that looks like intuition. And I think it'll be much sooner than we expect. So there are kind of big changes to the way we think about learning that are happening in the next few decades. And I want to make sure that the benefits of these developments reach further than just the most privileged people in a few developed countries. And at the same time that the risks of these developments, because I think there are significant risks, are also well understood all over the world. And we can be as thoughtful about deploying these technologies in developing countries as we would be in developed countries. So with those remarks, I want to kind of get into the panel. And the way that we thought we'd structure this is I'm going to ask a fairly broad question to each of the panelists, one after the other. I'm going to ask them to use the answer also to introduce themselves and the organizations that they work for, and kind of in the context of the question. Then we're going to explore a few of the themes, maybe have a little bit of back and forth on some of the issues that are coming out. And please feel free to get involved fairly early on. So I want to get through the first three statements and give them the space they need to kind of talk about their work. But then afterwards, feel free to jump in fairly early and really let's have an open discussion about some of these things. So I want to start with Carol.
Yes.
Carol, I already mentioned the kind of the role of people, right? And even though when we talk about technology, we often think of it almost as a way to get around people, right? Like people are inefficient and they're expensive, and with technology we can now, solve all those problems. But really, it's about people. It's not about technology. It's people learning things. And so I'd love to hear from you a little bit about the different ways that World Reader Ghana uses technology, uses different technologies, and what you've learned in designing and deploying them, and in particular with the role of involving people.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So just to provide a little bit of background, at World Reader, we are literally trying to help create a world in which every person can become a reader. And so this is really important work, right? Because we've got 770 million people across the world who cannot read. In Africa, we have 50% of schools that have few books or no books. And so at the very core of learning how to read is having access to books, right? What we do is to curate and deliver a library, a digital library of 31,000 books in 44 different languages to over 18 million people in 85 different countries. And the work that we're doing is, it's really changing lives in a very profound way. In schools in particular, we work with e-readers and establish e-reading projects so that schools are getting e-readers, the teachers are learning how to teach on the e-readers, and the students are also getting the e-readers. And these devices are being loaded with both local and international content. On the mobile side, we are working with pretty much any user that has a mobile phone and giving them access to a free mobile library of books that they can access right on their mobile phone. And we do this whether you're using a feature phone or what we call in Ghana a YAM phone, which is the most basic of phones. It's just increasingly becoming a very profound way to get access to information to a lot of people in the developed world. To your question about human interaction, I'll just start by telling a little story about a parent of one of our earliest programs. Her name is Stella, and she has a daughter named Mabel, who has been in an e-reading project for, I guess, going on 6 years now. And Stella talked to us about how her child just literally had no interest in school. She would rather stay at home, watch TV, play outside with her friends. And then World Reader brought this e-reading project to her school, and it literally just transformed her life. And now, if you fast forward to today, 6 years later, and you look at Mabel, she is excited about learning. Instead of going home to play outside, she wants to take her e-reader home and read books that we've loaded on the e-readers, right? And with the connection to human interaction, what we're seeing is that one of the main reasons why she enjoys being in the classroom is because of the level of interaction and engagement that she is having with her teacher and the device and the content loaded onto the device. So in no way are we suggesting that we should get rid of teachers and that they should stop interacting with students in a classroom, or that parents should stop reading to their children. Definitely humanity and individuals are at the very core of our work, and we'll always need them to do what we're doing. But what technology is doing is making the work that teachers have to do in the classroom more effective, more productive, more engaging, more interesting, and this is having profound results at the end of the day, right? Because you've got students that are reading more, they are reading better, and they're developing what we want to see happen across the entire world, really, and that is a strong culture of reading. And so that's part of what we're trying to do.
Great, thank you. Michael, shifting over to you. Yesterday there was a term that I heard, supply chain of funding, at the end of one of the sessions, and I wasn't quite sure what that meant, actually. And I've been talking to you a little bit about this, and really the issue is that in private capital markets, we have very well-defined systems for providing funding at different stages of the innovation process. Different types of funders, different types of funding, different appetites for risk. And we heard a little bit about, we heard a lot about financing in the session before. We didn't hear so much about this kind of funding. And so I'd love to hear a little more about, in your work, specifically focused on funding education technology innovation. Through the investments that you've done, what are some of the lessons you've learned that are maybe difficult or different in the education sector from other sectors, but also how does the private capital example compare to government funding or philanthropic funding, and where are the gaps in the different systems, and what are some of the things we could be working on?
Mm-hmm. So, hi, my name is Michael Staten. I am an investing partner at Learn Capital. We are a small firm of about 8 people. We've been operational for about a little over 7 years, and our portfolio of over 70 companies is now reaching over 300 million learners around the planet. And so one of our major takeaways, and the firm was founded with this belief, and we think it's no longer a belief, we've actually demonstrated it, that small amounts of capital invested in the right digital technology, education technology companies can scale learning opportunities to millions around the world at an unprecedented rate now that everyone is blessed with this or cursed with this connection of being on the internet or mobile devices. In yesterday's session and in the report that was demonstrated today, one of the messages was that there seems to be a gap in funding for scaling things that work in the nonprofit and government sectors. And I actually, based on that, did a little write-up which was distributed about how the capital supply chain works in technology innovation in Silicon Valley, where there are stage-appropriate amounts of funding with stage-appropriate expectations for kind of what we would call business milestones, where that organization should be at that time, and then the amount of capital that's appropriate if they're meeting those expectations to then go ahead and fund that company for the next stage of their growth, right? And it looks very clean in that paper. It's actually very messy in real life, but it does exist, and companies do get funded. I also have a little bit on the funding environment, which now over $2 billion a year is going to education technology. And that sounds like a lot of money, but in context, there's $12 billion a year that goes into healthcare. So that's a 6x amount of money going into healthcare versus education, and they're similar in their social importance and in their overall, the kind of size of the amount of money that goes into those socially important sectors. So our role is we focus on seed and Series A companies. They generally come to us when they look a little bit more like a rock band than an actual company, somewhere around like 5, maybe 10 people. And there's some proof that their idea is working, whether that's because they have a lot of users or whether it's because they're making a little bit of money. And then we fund them, and we help them sort through some of the issues that they need to sort out and set them on the road to go to the next stage of funders. And so the analogy that I use in the handout is it's kind of like going through a canal, right? Where at each stage, there's like an infusion of water or capital that helps raise the boat to the next level, and then the next gate is open. And I actually started my career in the classroom. I was a teacher, high school teacher, public high school, union-paying high school teacher in Houston, Texas. And the thing that, and I've gone on to help start 4 companies now, but the thing that has, in terms of life experience, that I still have in common with teachers is that our goal is to raise expectations for our entrepreneurs and companies in terms of what they can do as a company, in terms of the value they can deliver to learners and families and schools, and basically just consistently raise expectations and then clarify the path to getting there. And that's kind of what we do. It's a lot like being a teacher with, I just wire a lot more money, I guess, right? And I have some interesting case studies that I'll walk through when we talk about costs later.
Mm-hmm. Cool,
So,
thank you.
Yes.
Sash, over to you. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about technology platforms. And you work for Sesame Workshop, and I told you before, but I actually learned to count by watching Sesame Street in Germany. And so my mind immediately goes to, TV, right? But really what you've been doing over the last, actually probably a decade, is look at other platforms. And how can you take the core values and principles of what makes Sesame Workshop so special and then move them onto other technology platforms, mobile phones, computers, the web. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of what is that process, how are you thinking about different technologies, and also maybe where are you headed in the future?
Okay, sure. So first, thank you and congratulations on the report, and we feel very honored to be one of the case studies. Sesame Workshop in India, we are celebrating our 10th year, and it's way beyond television because it started 45 years ago as a TV show, but we've moved a lot since then. And I think at the core of it is we want to be where the children are and want to be on platforms that children are learning from. So in India, we do a plethora of stuff beyond television, which remains, one of our core areas. We produce, radio. We do digital games and applications, work in classrooms and communities, etc. I think living in a country with 1.2 billion population, with 900 million cell phone users, what drives us really is scale. So it's very hard for us to conceive of anything in India without keeping scale at the back of our heads, and it's kind of built into our DNA every time we think about it. And the way education is moving and where children are, and knowing that we need to access the poorest of the poor and the most marginalized, we are always constantly experimenting with what are those platforms, what are those technologies. And I kind of was talking to you earlier, and I think the framework really that we look at is threefold. We use technology to expand access, to engage with children and parents, and to really evaluate. And we use technology to make projects and programs more effective. So one of the projects we did was called Radio Phone, and it was really to address children of migrant populations, because children of that population don't have sustained schooling experiences because their parents are moving from place to place. And we partnered with community radio stations, and we made the content available through a IVR, like a voice response system at the back end. So we would broadcast on a community radio station, we would flash the number. People anywhere in India could actually access their own little community radio station by calling that number. In India, you have a very, I don't know if it's prevalent in America, but you have something called the missed call system. Nobody wants to spend money. So they kind of call you, the server cuts them off and calls them back in 30 seconds with a menu that allows them to listen to the project, listen to the program, the episodes, the songs, the games, whatever they want to do, but also leave their feedback and their comments. And data being a very important aspect of our projects, we used to collate that and broadcast it back to the community. And as Carol was saying, because we work in early childhood education, technology, the way we see it, is an enabler, not a replacer. And really, how do we enable technology to improve learning and to engage with parents? And more recently, we've started using technology really to also monitor and evaluate. It's helped us scale up our programs on the ground, particularly our community engagement programs, where we don't have to put 100 people on the ground, but we really can do that effectively through use of mobile phones and GPS locators and all sorts of apps that are available.
Cool, thank you. And actually, maybe we can build right on what you said towards the end, because I want to talk a little bit about impediments for technology innovation to go to scale. So what are some of the reasons why things are maybe not moving forward, even though they look like good ideas? And the report contains a whole string of both analysis but also recommendations. But one particular one is where I think technology can play a very important role, which is data and gathering evidence in ways that we couldn't do before. And maybe I'll switch to you. I'll let you tee this off, and then it sounds like you also have some thoughts. But how is technology playing a role in helping you make the case for the kinds of innovations that you're trying to scale?
Absolutely. So for us, data is huge. Data helps us to understand our users. It helps us to make sure that we're building a library that is adaptive and is making it possible for people to read books that are actually interesting and exciting, right? Through our mobile application, we are able to learn a lot about our users. We can tell, for example, what country you are when you're reading. We can tell which books are the most popular for you to read. We can also look at, are you just going through, flipping through pages, or are you actually finishing the book? Are you actually reading the information that's being supplied to you? And this is important because in developing our relationships with local publishers, we need to be able to help them understand what our users want to read so that they can then turn around and then work on curating that content for us. So that's the data analysis from the mobile perspective. Oh, and let me just add one additional thing. It's not just important for us to know, for example, that Abena in Ghana likes to read crime novels. We actually want to go a step further and have that algorithm tell us whether Abena, for example, wants to read books that are not just crime novels, but that also deal with female crime detectives and that have a happy ending. So to that end, it's almost like we're reclassifying how we look at books, and the Greek system is just no longer applicable to what we're doing on mobile. We also have to consider data around the efficacy of our programs. And this is important to us because clearly, if we want to make the case for going digital, you've got to demonstrate that what you're doing is really making a significant impact at the level of the user. And for us, that is the student, right? And so really across all of our programs, we do what's called an EGRA. I think many of you in this room are probably familiar with that. It's an early grade reading assessment. And whether it is a program that World Reader is directly implementing with the school, or if we're working with a partner like Pencils of Promise or Edify or Bridge International, they all use metrics to determine the efficacy of the program. So what we've been able to see across the board is that when you put books on a device, whether it's a mobile phone or an e-reader, children are reading. B, we're seeing dramatic increases in the reading speed that the students who are participating in these programs are delivering. And then thirdly, we're seeing an increase in oral reading fluency and comprehension that when you look at where they were at the start of the program and where they are a year and a half later, it's just incredible. And so that evidence-based information is helping us to make the case for why digital is such an important platform for improving literacy and building a culture of reading.
Yeah, and I mean, you're all technology innovators, but the same approach could apply to a less technology-strong project, right? You could still track metrics, and you could still gather data to show evidence. Does this ring any bells in your context?
I think it does. I always think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, and I'll just build off what Carol was saying. I think just having technology is a platform, so just having that platform is useful and it makes it more efficient. But I do want to touch upon one area which is to me very critical, which is the question of equity. And the reason I say it's a double-edged sword, no, seriously.
You're taking over my moderator role.
I'm so
equity.
sorry. Should I stop?
No, okay.
No, and I think I look at equity in many different ways, and one is obviously whose hand is the technology really in? In India, it's typically the males. So the women and the children who are supposed to be the direct beneficiaries very often do not get access to it. And therefore, even in terms of the way we are thinking about our programming and content, it's important for us to then start thinking about engaging the male parent so that it becomes accessible. And I'll give you a very great story that I love. So in this community radio project, for example, we achieved a twofold impact, I would say. One was that many communities were not sending their girls to school because the girls were herding cows. So they were tasked with the job of herding cows. We started broadcasting our program, and people heard it, and communities were getting involved. And they found a solution, and I call it cowpooling. So they actually, no, it's serious. It was a fantastic story. They actually found somebody to pool all the cows to herd so that the girls could go to school. Now that is an incredible and profoundly life-changing story that we heard from the community. And technology enabled us to achieve that outcome by just kind of moving that. Similarly, community radio stations were not getting any listenership from women and children. So just having our program on air enabled them to gain a listenership base that they weren't listening to. And I think those are, in some small ways, also looking at scale and sustainability on a much broader perspective, because there's ownership and there's building. These are the building blocks, and I think that's one of it. I think the second thing to me is the equity of access. Sorry, am I running out of time?
I know Carol has this fantastic statistic about gender use of your...
Right. So World Reader was the study of a UNESCO report that talked about reading habits in developing countries. And some interesting findings came from that result. One finding was that, okay, so men definitely have more access to mobile phones. In this study, 2/3 of the respondents were male, 1/3 were female. But what was exciting for us to hear was that although there were fewer women who were reading on their mobile phones, they were reading 6 times as much as the men and the boys. And then we thought to ourselves, wow, this is interesting. And we started to ask additional questions around, okay, so what do we have in our library that's making the women want to read? And now it's gone even further because we've been able to partner with the Melinda Gates Foundation to look at issues around gender. So we've hired a gender equity specialist, and she is going to help us to really look at what content do women and girls want to read. We know that, for example, when it comes to reproductive health, women feel safer reading about reproductive health and sexuality on a mobile phone rather than if they have an actual book, because people are looking around and they can see what they're reading. So, I mean, that's powerful. Do we have enough information out there, enough books out there that are gender sensitive? The answer is probably no. But what can we do as an organization to build up that database of books, of information, of gender-sensitive materials so that we can continue to encourage women to read? And so it's really powerful
cool.
stuff.
It's great. I mean, once you get this data, it's just interesting what you can learn about how people learn and what could you do to support that more. I want to pull me back if you want to come back to your point, but I want to get Michael into the discussion about equity. And also, after he's spoken, maybe if there are any questions, please start chiming in or interrupting us. So there's equity issues around gender and various other dimensions. One that I often think about is, I'm at the MIT Media Lab. We develop a bunch of new technologies. And often the first adopters are kids in very privileged communities. They go to the best schools. And so, we're really struggling with how do you go from that first wave to getting this innovation into the hands of more people. And I know you've invested in MOOCs, for example.
Sure.
And there's been quite a bit of discussion about, are they just helping people who are already well educated, or are they going further? So,
Right. So it's hard to talk about equity without talking about the cost of delivery, right? And one of the ways that we think about innovation is that innovation actually takes time. We want to be impatient. We want to share photos now. We want the tweet to come out now. But the cycles of innovation, the people that study these things say that an industry life cycle is about 30 years. 30 years, right? When education technology first became hyped, it was actually in the late 90s, and something like only 30 million people were on the internet. Fast forward to today, there are over 1 billion people that access Facebook alone per day, right? 100 million people concurrently use Snapchat on any given day. And so the sheer ability to reach learners has dramatically changed. And that has allowed a transformation function in the overall cost of delivery, right? Now, in the case study of Coursera, this is another kind of case study where when MOOCs came out, Coursera immediately became very hyped. Every day they were mentioned in hundreds of articles. They got to 1 million users faster than Facebook, right? Faster than Dropbox. And everybody was talking about it. 2 years later, everybody's disappointed, right? And we're not disappointed at all. We're very strong believers. In that same time period, they went from 1 million users to 25 million monthly unique learners. 1 million concurrent enrollments, right, in courses, right? And they do have data that the people that complete the courses and are taking best advantage of them already have some kind of undergraduate education, right? But they have dropped the cost of getting taking like 1 hour's worth of course credit. And you can't get credit, you can't get university credit for a Coursera course except for in special circumstances. But they've dropped the price of that from, in the US, an average of over $600 to $79, right? And it is free to audit, because with technology, we have a concept that's called the zero marginal cost learner. And what that means is if you have a business model that maybe makes money from people that have a credit card that they can pull out, right, and swipe or enter in the numbers, if you have a business model that works, you can actually serve everyone else for free, right? And that totally transforms the access that people have as more and more people come online, as more and more people get smartphones, as we know that the global trend is in that direction. And then when you think about kind of capital efficiency, kind of per dollar in, this is just a little case study, a little thought experiment, okay? Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, donated $400 million to Stanford University, which already has a $22 billion endowment, by the way.
So they needed the money.
So they needed the money. They were in desperate need of money. Of a $750 million campaign that will serve 300 learners at its peak, the Knight Hennessy Scholars, right? That is a capital contribution of $2.5 million per learner that can take advantage of that, right? NYU Global Network University, this is an example of a university that's trying to scale, has raised over $1 billion for a campus in Abu Dhabi and Shanghai. They expect to raise $3 billion. The total capacity will make it, which is around 5,000 students, will make it so that it is $681,000 capital contribution to serve a single learner, right? All right, now if we look at Minerva, which is a new breed of university, it's something we call a cloud-powered school, where they're going to use technology to drive efficiency at scale, right? So Minerva is currently serving, they raised a little over $80 million, and they're serving 300 learners now, which will be the peak of the Stanford thing, right? Right now they're at $300,000 a learner, but if they hit their plan over the next 7 years, they will be at $8,900 in capital per seat for a learner. If you look at Coursera, with their 1 million course enrollments, it was $146, because Coursera has raised a little over $140 million. $146 in capital for the ability to enroll one student. Now I have a case study about a unique company that we just saw. It's kind of the most extreme example. It's called PhotoMath. It is math practice. It walks people through how to solve math problems, okay? And this isn't a university enrollment, but it's a pretty extreme case. This is a 2-year-old company that has had 25 million downloads and has 5 million unique users every month, right? Their operating budget is about $550 a day. They help learners solve 3 million math problems a day. So if you were going to fund a tutoring program, right, to help people with 250,000 hours of math, you would need a staff of probably 125,000 tutors, assuming they can do 2 hours a day. And you would have to pay them, if you were going to pay them $20 an hour, that would be an operating budget of $5 million a day. This is a team of 8 people in Croatia. This is a 9,000% improvement in the cost of delivery. And they are reaching 625,000 learners per employee. And the capital in per learner reached is 1/5 of 1 penny. 1/5 of 1 penny, right? So anyway, this is like,
I would just stop there.
Yeah, so even though not everyone is accessing PhotoMath because you need a smartphone to use it, you cannot say that over the long run that this is not going to make a difference about access and about equity.
So I wonder if there are any questions at this point. Go ahead.
Having had the honor to start a study with 2 Nobel laureates at WashU, and Professor Arvidsson, who's now, did the Mars rover project. I think you have quality issues here, and if you're, studying with a Nobel Prize winner in medicine or in economics, I think you're getting a much more valuable education than if I'm asking how to solve generalized least square, blue information, maximum likelihood for generalized least squares for my, advanced econometrics class. I mean, I think you're talking about apples and turnips here. I can think for the broad spectrum, but I think you cannot deny that the education one gets at Stanford.
I'm not denying that at all.
Or you're at MIT.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
It's expensive. Universities are expensive. Research labs cost fortunes.
Sure.
But the student that comes out of there is producing. I mean,
just as a counter, most of the people who wrecked the U.S. economy came out of Harvard and MIT.
and the people that saved the U.S. economy came out of MIT. So you've had central bank governors and professors of central bank governors that saved us from economic catastrophe too.
But maybe we can get both Sasha and Carol in on this a little bit, because I think you do. That was a bit of a joke, my response to you, but I think you're absolutely right. There are very different ways of learning, and there are very big qualitative differences, and we can't just pretend that there's one particular thing that will just work best and works at scale for everyone. So I don't know if you have thoughts on this. On one hand, this incredible ability to reduce cost. On the other hand, how do you get people in a room with a mentor who can provide the kind of inspiration or spur curiosity in the way that we know people do?
I mean, quality always is a big issue, and we know that the privileged class that can afford high quality education obviously perform at a very different league. But listen, we are talking about a country where 90 million children have no access, right? I mean, let's also look at it contextually as to where are we benchmarking that quality. 90 million have no access. Millions of children die before they reach their, 5th birthday, and many of them are malnutrition. So already you're dealing with a population that is entering learning at a disadvantage than the privileged lot. So I think quality keeps coming up again and again, and I think this is, none of us want to compromise with quality, but I think what is more important is how do you provide the best quality you possibly can to people who have no access. And I think that's really the issue that we grapple with day in and day out. And I think we all try in our own ways to meet that as much as possible.
You want to? Yeah.
I'll just add, I think from a cost effectiveness perspective, when I think about, having a physical book versus a digital book, it is expensive. It is very expensive for most schools, most communities, most governments in Africa to pay for physical books. It is expensive to put those books on a ship and send them to the continent. It is expensive to, once the books are at the port, to get them to often very rural locations. And if you manage to solve that problem and get the books to the various schools in the rural locations, you have the issue of storage. Many schools don't have libraries. They don't have air-conditioned buildings. They don't have the type of infrastructure that you need in order to have a thriving physical library. Do I love physical books? I have so many books at my home. I read to my young son all the time, but not every parent is able to do that. And so when you think about going digital, then there's the cost of, oh geez, you've got like the hardware cost, you've got to pay for the books, you've got to tell the teacher about this device and how they use it in the classroom. It seems really complicated, right? But when you consider that on your mobile phone, you can literally have a walking library of books, it's cost effective. When you consider that on an e-reading device, you can have thousands of books, including textbooks, including the teacher lesson plan, it becomes extremely cost effective. And we actually had a team from Stanford to sort of look at this whole cost effectiveness bit. Does it really make sense to go digital? And what we discovered is that when you include textbooks and story readers, supplementary materials, it becomes multiple times more cost effective to use this medium than it would to use physical books in the classrooms, in the environments that we're working in. So then the next question is, all right, so you've introduced this technology, but how do they sustain it in areas where power is an issue? So what we've done is look at different solar options, but not all solar options are equal. You have to test what you're doing with solar in all the different types of climates that you might see.
Sorry, I think Michael has another example where he's going to make it even cheaper than he
Okay.
Oh, actually, I'm not. I'm gonna pop some neurons here. First of all, I want to say that so American universities have about $430 billion in endowment money that subsidizes them. They also take $90 billion a year, $80 to $90 billion a year in tuition from families. They also get another, I don't know how many $1 billion a year in direct subsidies through financial aid or research grants. And so if you went to, let's say, India, and you said, oh, you want the American university system for all of your people? Cool, put $430 billion into the bank, right? And then create another multi-$100 billion a year subsidy line item. They just couldn't do it. It's just, the math doesn't work. They can't make that work, right? And so we have to kind of like think outside the box a little bit, because I would love to be able to recreate Stanford and I love Stanford. I go there all the time. We'll be there next Monday, right? But we can't recreate that for everyone at the pace that we need to reach everyone. And so one of the things I see policymakers and leaders do sometimes where we just kind of have a thought gap is in the role of what we call unbundling, right? Which is the idea of picking something very, very, very specific and doing it very well. Because people that are in leadership positions need to worry about the mass population, and they also need to worry about all of their problems all at once, right? And so they tend to dismiss innovations that are focused on one little sliver of the pie, like reading on mobile phones or like math practice, right? But then what happens is if you get enough of that innovation for math, for reading, for chemistry, and all these other different types of innovations that we're backing, on the other side of that experience, right, with access to a mobile phone and access to the internet, you have a movement that is being called a la carte learning, where you have a buffet of options that are available to you, and you kind of get to pick and choose. And all of these are low cost or free. And you're not recreating the Stanford experience, but at least you have access to something that will allow you to create the opportunities in your life or meet the expectations of your family. And so that's kind of, we have to think about these unbundled providers, and we have to think on the other side of it, this idea that there is a whole solution for learners if they're able to pick a la carte and they have a diversity of options.
Let's get a few more voices in. So we have Urvashi, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. Urvashi, go. Please introduce yourselves.
I'm Urvashi Sani from India, Study Hall Educational Foundation, and also co-founder of Digital Study Hall. And for the last 10 years, we've been experimenting with using technology to reach underserved populations. So we've used video, we've used, the simplest kind of technology which doesn't require internet, which doesn't require computers as well. And one of the main obstacles we've found is that at the user end, like you said, Shashwati, that even when I'm thinking of your World Reader, and this is all very exciting, by the way, and I'm very cheered up and all geared up to do some of this stuff, is that there just isn't power. So we've had to move to hybrid models where we've got to produce print manuals, or teachers don't have access. Even with mobile, we've tried to use that. It's expensive to download things. It takes time. That costs money, right? Even when they have access, they don't have the time to download lessons for hours and hours and for books. So I'm kind of confused, and I'm trying to imagine it, but my imagination is sort of failing. In terms of when I think of the teachers we are reaching in remote Basti and remote Banda in UP, right? And we've given them all our materials. We put it on a pin. We're trying to put it on a chip. And they say, yeah, but can we have the book, please? And when we evaluate it, we find that they use our books much more than they're able to use the chip, which is more dynamic. They get to see a class in action. It's great. But they just don't have the stuff at the back end.
Okay,
so I think,
we'll come back to...
Sorry.
Yeah. So the question is, what is the solution to
Take a few questions.
Yeah, take a few questions, come back. And I took away power, access. There really are access issues, but also there are preferences for physical books sometimes. And
thank you very much. My name is Georges Mihails. I'm a member for UNESCO Task Force since 2000. We started with what is called intangible cultural heritage around the world. Now it's a mainstream program inside UNESCO. So local culture, wisdom, tradition, music, dance, and so on, cooking and others. So we had some experiments, but not in developing countries, only Scandinavia and Japan, in remote rural area. So what we did, we accumulated the best possible content about culture and nature and knowledge in digital high definition, as Okinawa in Japan, subtropical prefecture, was the first one to prepare such a package. We use it in Nordic countries, in Scandinavia. My point is this: every time we gave shared access to children, parents, local community, to knowledge about what is the world all about, culture, nature, science, and so on, the feedback interest was overwhelming. It was humbling. Afterwards, we managed to launch some European Commission projects and some results, but we don't have enough results. My challenge is to all of us, what are those technologies which allows us to create some enthusiasm to discover what knowledge is all about, cultural heritage, natural heritage. We did it in probably 8 areas around the world, from South Africa to Scandinavia. So motivation, inspiration, guidance, out of school, after school, empower local communities and families. And someone in Africa, the environment is different. How to help them know? And there are now resources prepared by UNESCO where I'm involved, or Japan. How to have a journey in knowledge. And today, digital high definition is fantastic for this. So beyond mobile and so on, this is the challenge, and that's why I moved to Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Got it.
There was another hand there, yeah.
Hi, this is Kim Wright-Velich from Echidna Giving. First, I'll make my comment and then my question. My comment is, a la carte education strikes me a little bit like a la carte news, and we see how well that's worked out.
Fair.
In terms, so the question actually is directed at you, Michael. I'm a big advocate for impact investing and believe in the potential of private markets to solve social problems. But one of the things that's a real challenge in that space is when the market turns down. If you have $160 million funding from a VC firm and they're looking for an exit, or you're not getting the returns that you expect and the portfolio of investments is important, then, of course, all the marginalized aspects that wrap around the core offering get shaved off, right? That's where the cuts occur first. It's a little like, microfinance historically, where you push the average lender up in affluence to make up for profitability pressures. So what do you have in place at Learning Capital that compensates for that so that you stay on mission when there's economic pressure?
Maybe one more question, then we'll...
Without giving away my age, I had the honor of working with Seymour Papert in Senegal in Wolof for the first turtle exercise.
That's
and there was astonishing learning outcomes from that.
Late 20s.
Sorry? No. No, it was in the 80s, right? My question is this, because it revolves around acceptability in a local context, but also cost. What do we know about the role of critical mass? What are the markers for a critical mass that can help investment capitalists believe that this innovation could really work, and which also seems to help societies to recognize the innovation could work? And I'm thinking specifically what happened with mobile phones. When they were only aimed at the wealthy and cost $1,000 each and accounts had to be on credit cards, they never went anywhere. As soon as someone figured out how to do it for $25, you find them in even the poorest families. So there's a marker there. But also in terms of when you're talking about education, which is highly culturally specific, what indicators do we have of the critical mass being reached where people are almost ready to say, well, how come we didn't always have this? And the kids who come along say, well, this is the only thing I ever knew.
Okay, I'll let you guys pick and choose the questions, and I have some thoughts as well, but I'll see.
So I think maybe I'll just pick what Urvashi talked about a little bit, and then I'm sorry I didn't get your name, but the gentleman from FHI. I think those are really important questions. I'm sorry?
It's Moses.
Hi. I was at the Lego conference recently, and Mitch Resnick from MIT talked about the power of the 4 Ps, project, passion, peers, and play. And I think goes back to the a la carte menu and how kids can pick and choose, but that was just as an aside. What we found, because we work in very remote rural areas as well, is that innovation it breeds more innovation. So how many of you really, people come to my house these days and they don't even say hi. When I open the door, they say, hey, do you have a phone charger? And it's incredible, right? But it's true because I think the psyche, the mindset of people, even in villages where there is no power, is how do I charge my phone? And it has bred an enormous level of indigenous solution providers. There are people with car batteries that go from household to household to enable people to charge phones. So I think in areas where people really depend on the phone so much and it's such a new thing for them, to keep it charged is very critical and crucial, and they'll find ways and means to do it. We haven't found that a problem, and one of the things we actually do is use it a lot to support teacher training in the Anganwadis or the government childcare centers we work in. We preload their phones with activities and stuff, and and it's very easy for them to use it. And we call up, we do a narrowcast, we call them once a week, remind them about the activity of the day, we call them back, ask them a few questions, monitor it. It just makes it very easy, and they're very used to doing it. So I'm not saying, I found it rare that a child care center worker in the government system will actually even open the book, because they're given books by the government, they never open it. It goes into the cupboard, and that's where it stays. So, and we find providing it on tablets or mobile phone makes it much more interesting for them and exciting for them, because there's a newness and there's a convenience. So, so that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about. And the second thing is the critical mass, which I think is a really important question. At what pace do you kind of look at what is that critical mass? And I think it really goes back to, in my way of thinking, to the story that I was alluding to, is what role and who are the agents of change, right? Developing those champions, developing that R&D facility, because every time I talk to a mobile value-added service provider, a telecom in India, and I say, hey, we have this great content, and can you kind of do something with us to make it available so that people don't have to pay for this content? And they say, oh, madam, okay, we are only about ABCD, which is people only download astrology, Bollywood, cricket, and devotion. So we haven't come to education yet. So when we come to education, you can come back to us. So there is, and Madhav was talking earlier about an information gap, and I think there is a huge information gap on parent education in countries like India. We're dealing with first-generation learners. So how do you really move that indicator? And unless you move those parents, I don't think you'll get the critical mass that you are looking at. So my two cents.
Do you want to jump in on the social impact? Oh, do you want to jump in here?
Yes,
Go ahead.
real quickly, just piggybacking on what Sasha said. Pretty much every school that we operate in has power issues. And for any program that we implement, solar has to be a part of the option that we offer them. And nowadays, you can find solar solutions that literally work under any weather condition and that are really inexpensive. For example, there's one solar company that we're working with called B-Box, and for as little as $500, you can charge up to 200 devices, which is just incredible. But quite apart from, dealing with issues of power, I think we also have to think about, just behavioral change. When you're bringing technology to children, they are excited about it. I mean, they're, whether you're in the developed world or a developing country, children all over the world are excited about technology. They're excited about playing with gadgets, and they get up to speed really quickly on how to use it. With teachers and with parents, it's not always the case, right? I mean, they've been using physical books for many, many years. They've been doing things in a set way, and then you're coming in with this new program, and there's resistance, there's hesitancy to accept what you're doing. And what you have to make sure you do is spend enough time sensitizing the community, sensitizing the teachers. You literally, in a very practical way, have to show them how this new technology is meant to make their life easier. We don't want your life to be more complicated by what we're bringing. We want to show you how it makes life easier. So instead of having to carry around 6 or 7 books from class to class, it's all on one device. Instead of having to, whether you have a scripted lesson plan or a general lesson plan, it's on the device. I mean, this is a way to literally integrate every aspect of what you're doing into one device. And in the beginning, there's that resistance, but over time, they start to see how much value it's really adding to their role, and they get excited about engaging the students in the classroom. I mean, you have so many examples of schools that are seeing increased enrollment because, my child needs to go to that school that has the latest technology. And in doing this, you also managed Jenny talked about elevating the role of the teacher. And that is something that we're also seeing in our program schools because these teachers are starting to realize that there's a real, real positive implications for learning, getting on the bus with digital. Because guess what? The world is going digital, whether you like it or not. You just need to figure out how to work with it in a way that makes what you're doing easier and just streamlines the whole procuse. Can I make one other comment?
Can we switch to Michael and you can come back?
Okay.
No worries. Excuse me.
It's okay.
That wasn't me, that was him. I think one way to kind of address your 2 questions about kind of what is actually possible now and then kind of like how to get traction and get started when you have big ideas. And I think that a lot of people like to be very idealistic and say, like, don't let your big ideas be constrained by things that are impossible. I actually tend to focus on the inverse, which is like, don't let your big ideas blind you to the things that are possible today, right? And don't overlook what's possible right now just because you have ambitions that are only possible 10 years from now, right? And so entrepreneurship and innovation always lives in a space that Stephen Johnson calls the adjacent possible, right? You can't reach too far out of what is possible today, right? And most young, early organizations that are operating in the margin, many of them fail because they drown in their own ambition, to be honest. And the thing that they don't focus on enough is what is their path to growth? And one of the tried and true early phases of the path to growth is you have to focus on what's called a beachhead, right? So, for D-Day, we wanted to enter Europe, and we couldn't go on all fronts. We had to pick one beach to land on and take, right? And so sometimes you have to focus on just one learner or just one classroom or just one teacher and make sure that you deliver great value to them before you can move on to your next set of ambitions. And so one of the things that we work with entrepreneurs on, to answer your question, is how do you sequence your priorities so that you don't drown in your own ambition and you don't run out of cash, right? Because, look, everybody knows when the tide goes out, you see who doesn't have their bathing suit on, right? And the reality is both us as a firm, but then we also have to work with companies to make sure that they are working within their own cash constraints, that they're prioritizing what is possible today, and that they sequence their ambitions in a scalable path to where they can achieve some of our bigger goals. And these are amazing, huge goals, but they're going to take a decade to get to, right? And so I think being hybrid, using paper, figuring out how, what's the kind of solar backpack you can use, right? Working within the constraints of today is totally realistic. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to get to a place that is where we want to be. But it's just, we have to kind of, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So let's focus on what the next step is, right? Yeah.
I don't think you fully answered the second question.
The second question.
Which is about, if I understood correctly, staying true to your social mission if you're funded through venture capital and the markets go down, and like, how do you stay on track?
Yes. Well, so when entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, NGO entrepreneurs, and company entrepreneurs, when they choose investors, they're looking for people who understand and believe in that mission and are going to be with them kind of like through the thick of it to try to make that possible, right? Our partners are unique in the sense that we have literally decades of experience in education, and it's all we do, it's all we're focused on, it's all we think about every morning when we wake up. And they choose to work with us because they know that we're going to be with them kind of through the thick. That doesn't mean that some of them won't fail, and we have to have processes for helping the process of failure be elegant and be embraced. And then in terms of returning capital to our investors, I mean, look, we've only invested a little over 100 million. We have 180 million under management total. That does not compare to the Stanford $22 billion endowment. And our sets of investors that have believed in us today are similar in the sense that they have a longer-term horizon on why they are working with us, right? And they understand at any given point there's risks. And that's just the nature of early-stage innovation. It just is. And, we hope that we have our bathing suits on so that if the tide goes out, we're still around. Yeah.
We also hope that you have your bathing suits
I know.
on.
Is that bad imagery for this crowd?
Totally different
Is that not a DC thing? I'm a Washington outsider, so...
And the one thing I would add is, I don't think you're making the claim that venture capital is the right type of finance for all kinds of innovation in education technology. There may be innovations where you need a longer time frame.
I was having a discussion with Graham on Twitter about this, about the for-profit, non-profit, government, state responsibility, private company scaling. And look, it's a symphony. It's gonna take a symphony. Yeah. Just because I play the trumpet and know how to play the trumpet, I'm not a bad person because I don't play the violin. It's just I know how to play the trumpet, right? So it's gonna take a symphony. It's gonna take an ecosystem. And so I think we have to appreciate kind of everybody's role in that ecosystem, even if they play a different instrument.
Any questions at this point? Because I have another theme. Okay, one more question, then I do want to get to this.
It's just one. Sean Slade from ASCD, we're a global education association here in DC. One commentary and one question. The commentary is what you're doing around access is commendable, but we can't confuse access with quality necessarily. It's like one does not equate to the other all the time. So access is one thing, but quality education is in the SDG goals for a reason. The question is this. At a recent education conference in Dubai, we had a panel on education and technology, and they were talking about the teacher in 2030. Mm-hmm. And the question was, will technology outsource the teaching profession? And we had ministers of education from around the world there, and to paraphrase the answer, they said, and I want to get your reactions to it, they said basically, if you believe the role of an educator is to teach an algebraic formula, or to teach content, or to be a delivery system, then yes, your role will be outsourced, not by 2030, but outsourced by 2020. But if you believe the role of the educator or the teacher is to nurture, is to personalize learning, is to be that guide on the side, then your role will be enhanced by technology because technology can't do that human interaction. So I'd like to get your perspectives.
Yes.
Yes.
And we like to talk a lot.
Yeah. So. We kind of spoke about this a while ago, but yeah, absolutely. Like we said, it's an enabler, it's not a replacer. So.
But I started as a public school teacher, and the job that I had to do every day was impossible to do well, at least by my own standards. And the reason is you get pulled in so many different directions. And there's so many things you have to do as a teacher that are not core to growing my learners, basically, growing a learner, right? Mm. And I had to deliver the content. I had to check attendance. I had to make sure that this person had a pencil, like there are so many different things. The cognitive load on any teacher on any given one day would like pop most of our brains. And I got on this path of using technology because I was so frustrated. I used Google to do research. I used technology. I was like, where are the apps for me as a teacher? where are the apps for my learners so that they can be stronger learners? And luckily, and I had a bunch of ideas about how to do that. And luckily, a decade later, a lot of those things exist now and have millions, if not tens of millions of users, because they do help things operate a little bit more smoothly so that teachers can focus on the way that they actually want to interact with the learner and grow the learner rather than kind of be mired down with all the day-to-day.
Do you have a comment on this?
My only comment is that, without a doubt, in developing countries, teachers will always be at the very core of the learning experience. And technology is in place to help enhance what they do. So yes, I agree with my colleagues.
So I'll disagree with my panel, only a little bit, because you said 2030, I think, and I think it'll take a little bit longer, but we are developing, and it's not that this is something I am necessarily promoting here, also I want to be very clear, but there are artificial intelligence systems that are being developed in the health sector right now, where doctors are kind of going through the diagnosis process, having conversations with the patient, but then the artificial intelligence is better able to diagnose what's wrong with the patient than the doctor, him or herself, is. And you could kind of take the next step. We're already there today. The next step in this will be that the role of the doctor will be merely asking questions, a little bit of empathy, a little bit of intuition, but that space gets smaller and smaller. So I think we will start filling even really high quality interactions between learners and technology that currently are only possible through human interaction with software systems, but it will take a little bit longer. And I'm not sure it's a good thing. I think using technology to enhance the role of people is a much better way forward for humanity. Other questions at this point? Quick one. I know you. This is not. I don't believe.
Just to follow up on what you said, that, what makes me very uneasy often when people talk about 2030 and 2015, and as though all the countries in the world were at the same place, which they're not.
Sure.
Right? So when we are talking about this is going to happen, I wonder who you have in mind, because I know that if you go 20 kilometers outside my city, they're about 20 years behind. Right, so just a comment.
No, very good comment.
Great point. Yeah.
And I don't know if we have enough time to fully get into this topic, but I at least want to kind of open the conversation or bring it in, which is yesterday there was a conversation about assisted sunsetting of things, of experiments that don't, and we used a different term yesterday, but of things that are not working. And how can you make sure that things that aren't working get stopped in a good way? And there was, I thought, the beginning of a really good conversation where some people argued that it's very fair to speak about experimentation and innovation, but in education, the people you're experimenting on are kids, are learners, and so you can't really afford to fail catastrophically, right? If your new invention of teaching kids math really doesn't work, then they didn't learn math. So at the same time, we know that there will never be any change or innovation if we don't experiment, because by definition, we don't know what works until we've tried it. So I'm wondering, in the context of your organizations and your work, how do you make sure you still have that space for experimentation? You can try new things, you can kind of push the boundaries of what you're doing right now, and yet make sure that you're not facing catastrophic failures in some way. How do you do that balance?
I don't know. I think for us as Sesame, it's probably relatively easier than for World Reader. Because, look, at the end of the day, we develop content, and we know that we need to find ways and means to get that content out of the door. Whether it's through tablets or mobile phones or radio or, in teachers' hands in books and curriculum, etc. So I think when we look at experimentation, a lot of the experimentation we are looking at is mostly related to delivery and enhancement of quality, and how do you really improve and strengthen the current quality in systems.
And would you say it's also more in the like the out of school space or like complementary to school space?
No, we also work in schools, in government primary schools, and predominantly with the government early childhood centers in India. We also run our own preschools, the Sesame Street preschools. And we also have a lot more informal networks, community engagement and mass media, etc. But it's predominantly our innovations or our experimentations are really with looking at how do we strengthen and improve quality of teaching, of learning, of engaging with parents, providing language and strategies. So I think that makes life a little easier for us, but I think that's a really important question, which I think Michael...
I think you're actually just doing a good job at it. I think that is the answer. You're paying attention to what's happening, you're gathering data.
Yeah, and we're feeding it back.
Well, I think at World Reader, it's important for us to not just start an implementation, do some training, and then walk away. I mean, we have to make sure that we continue to stay engaged with our schools so that we understand in a very deep way what's happening in these programs. So we've actually evolved a lot. I think in the beginning, we were sort of more concerned with the bells and the whistles and the technology itself. And now we're taking, I think, a laser-sharp focus on the student, and then making sure that every innovation, every new technology that we introduce has the student at the center of everything that we do. So just to give you an example, in the early days, a lot of the teacher training that we did was really focused on, so this is the Kindle, and this is how you use the Kindle, and this is how you turn it off, this is how you flip pages. And then there was a little bit of pedagogical framework in there, but not in a very strong and deep way. And so what we're doing now is looking at, okay, this is how you use the device, but we've expanded our training to also help teachers in a very practical way understand this is how you use the device with students. These are examples of activities that you can do in the classroom that will help children learn how to read. And that just has really sort of transformed our approach and helped strengthen our delivery model, because now not only are teachers getting advice on how to use a device, but they literally understand what they are supposed to do in the classroom. And before, there was probably less of that. I think we're also looking more at how we get community buy-in. You can have a great intervention, but if the community elders don't understand the value and the importance of reading, it's not going to work. If the chiefs, who have a very prominent role in African culture, don't understand the value of reading, it's not going to work. If parents don't understand the role that they play in helping their children to learn how to read, it's not going to work, because there's reading that happens in the classroom when you're in school, but then there's a whole, there are many more hours that you're out of school that you need to understand how to integrate the reading process at home and through after-school programs. So those are some of the ways in which we've tried to evolve as an organization. And the last piece that I'll mention is on the monitoring and evaluation piece of what we do. I think, we've had a lot of low-touch ways of evaluating our programs, and we're putting a lot more rigor around what we're doing. We're inviting third parties to help us figure it out. We're beefing up our internal capacity to make sure that we understand exactly what we're doing right, what we can do better, and what we just need to completely revamp and scrap and think through in better ways.
Cool. How do you test new approaches without risking negative effects?
So we focus on whether or not, learners, their families, schools, etc., adopt and keep using the technology. That's what we choose to focus on, mainly because that's our instrument again, right? So other people might do different ways of evaluating. In this supply chain of capital that I've talked about that helps companies scale, we operate really one gate. We focus on Series A. We do a little bit of seed investing, but we really focus on Series A. And our obligation is to set the expectations for the next gate operator. We tell the company, this is how the next gate operator is going to evaluate you. This is the time frame in which you need to achieve these milestones. And if we do our job well, something like 50% of the companies will actually go and make it through the next gate. Our track record is actually a little better. It's a little more like 60, 70. But, and by the way, these gate operators, they look at 100 companies and they choose to fund one. That's like the ratio. That's how kind of high these expectations are, right? And that allows me to really focus on this one gate and then getting them to the next gate. And it allows the entrepreneur to focus on, okay, how do I get to the next gate? Okay, how do I need to get to the next gate? They're not like, you know, standing in the Pacific Ocean and having somebody say, okay, yeah, make it to the Gulf of Mexico, take apart your boat, walk through the jungle, and don't get bitten by mosquitoes, right? It's like there's a canal,
and
right?
wear your bathing suit. But what happens to the learners and the parents of the 30% companies that are using the products of the 30% of the companies that may like using those products of the companies that don't make it to the next level?
Well, so in our world, there's acqui-hire, and then there's like acquisitions. And one of the things I've always looked for in the nonprofit world is like M&A activity, right? It's like, you know, how do you take like, you know, one and combine it with another? Yeah. So companies will get acquired. We'll have a difficult conversation with the entrepreneurs, and we'll say, look, we invested in this company because we believe in you. We still believe in you, but we need to, quote, find you a home. And then we help make sure that they have a soft landing and they're not, you know, unemployed for too long. So, yeah.
Right, so if he ever says, "Find you a home," you know what that means.
That's what that means.
We're at the end. I just want to kind of maybe say one thing that came through a lot of the comments and questions, which is there seems to be a real dichotomy between cost and quality. I feel like we didn't bridge that gap enough in the conversation. And I personally feel very strongly that digital technology is not just about reducing cost of lower quality solutions, but there are solutions you can design and develop that make use of technology that are equal or superior of non-technology supported learning. And so I think that's a space we need to do a huge amount more work in. And of course, the cost issues are incredibly relevant in the scaling conversation, but I wouldn't want us to take our eye off of this idea of really high quality education supported by digital technologies. But I want to thank the three panelists, and I want to ask you to join me.
It's over already?
And thank all of you for the questions and staying till the very end. And I'm not sure what I'm handing over to or who I'm handing over. Okay.
Tell them to come drink next door.
Yeah.
Come drink next
Hello?
door.
Yeah, okay. So huge thanks to Philip and the panelists and to all of you, and welcome to have some food and some drinks right out here.